I knew something was wrong the moment she walked into my living room without knocking, without calling, and without even pretending she had a reason to be there. She pushed the door open like she owned the place and headed straight toward my sofa, still wearing that smug expression she always seemed to wear when she thought she had power over me. She didn't ask if she could come in. She didn't greet me. She didn't acknowledge that it was still my home and not hers. She just dropped herself onto my sofa like she was claiming territory. And when she looked at me, my own daughter-in-law, she stared with this cold, challenging glare as if she was daring me to question her. In that moment, a single thought flashed in my head: how did we get here? How did things become so bad between us? And more importantly, was I wrong for what I eventually did to put an end to her behavior? Tell me honestly if you think I crossed a line, because sometimes I still wonder whether I was too harsh or simply too late. It's strange how a story can begin long before the moment that finally pushes you over the edge. People see the explosion, not the slow burn that caused it. And trust me, this slow burn started years before she ever barged into my home like that. Back when my son first introduced us to his then girlfriend, now wife, I honestly thought she was polite, maybe a little too polished, but sweet in her own way. They had met at work, bonded over some big project, and apparently she had impressed him with her intelligence, ambition, and these exaggerated, wifely qualities she always bragged about. From the beginning, I sensed something off. It wasn't anything obvious, just small things: the way she constantly adjusted her hair while pretending she wasn't looking for attention, the way she always steered conversations back to herself, the way she subtly dismissed anything she didn't consider sophisticated enough. At first I brushed it off. After all, my son was in love and I wanted to support him. I told myself that maybe she was trying too hard, that maybe she just needed time to settle in. But the more time passed, the clearer it became that she wasn't trying to impress us. She was evaluating us, judging us, scoring us as if we were contestants in some silent competition she carried in her head. My husband noticed it too. Every time she visited, she'd walk around the house like she was assessing property value, touching picture frames, lifting vases, checking corners as if she were looking for dust she could later use against me. I remember once she asked, in front of everyone at dinner, "Oh, you still have this old furniture. Haven't you thought about upgrading? My mother just renovated her entire house last year." It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it, like she was comparing me to some kind of outdated appliance that needed replacing. My daughter, who has never been one to hold her tongue, pulled me aside afterward and said, "Mom, that woman thinks she's better than all of us." And I think that was the first time I allowed myself to admit it. She did think she was better. She acted like she was doing us a favor by being with my son. Still, I didn't say anything. I told myself it was just insecurity on her part. She came from a wealthy family. She had grown up with maids, drivers, and a mother who controlled every aspect of her life. Maybe she was just used to a certain lifestyle and didn't know how to adjust to something simpler. I tried to meet her halfway. I tried to welcome her, include her, make her feel comfortable. But she didn't want comfort. She wanted superiority. And every encounter chipped away at my patience until all that was left was this quiet resentment that I tried so hard to hide. The real problems began after they got married. Suddenly, my son wasn't my son anymore. He was hers. If I called him, she answered. If I invited them over, she responded on his behalf. If I suggested a family dinner, she turned it into a negotiation, asking who else would be there, what dishes I would cook, how long it would be, and whether it fit into her schedule. And the worst part, my son didn't even realize any of it was happening. He was so wrapped up in keeping her happy that he didn't notice she was slowly cutting him off from us. One day I asked him directly, "Are you still able to make decisions without her permission?" He laughed it off, saying I was just being dramatic. But I knew. Mothers always know. Then came the first big incident, the argument over living arrangements. They had been discussing buying a home, and naturally, I offered advice when asked. But apparently offering advice was an offense, because she snapped at me, saying, "We don't need your input on every little thing. We can handle our lives just fine without you." My son stood there quietly, staring at the floor like he was afraid to choose a side. I felt humiliated. It wasn't the words. People say worse things all the time. But the way she said them, as if I had overstepped by caring. I remember going to bed that night with this heavy, painful realization that my place in my son's life had shifted, and not by his choice but by hers. After that, her attitude only grew worse. She started visiting less, calling less, participating less in family events. And when she did show up, she acted like she was above everything. She made comments about my cooking, about the decor, about how I didn't understand modern parenting techniques, even though she didn't have kids yet. She inserted herself into every conversation just to redirect attention back to her. She rolled her eyes when she didn't get praise. And the more I tried to be gracious, the more she took advantage of my silence. But nothing prepared me for the day everything finally snapped. It started as a normal morning. I had just finished cleaning the living room, rearranging cushions, wiping the table, and finally settling down with a cup of tea. It was one of those rare peaceful moments I cherished, when the house was quiet and everything felt under my control. Then I heard the sound of the front door clicking open. I wasn't expecting anyone. My husband was at work, my daughter was out of town, and my son never came without calling first. I stood up and walked toward the hallway just as the door swung fully open, and there she was. Not knocking, not waiting, just walking in like she had every right to be there. She brushed past me without so much as a hello. She tossed her purse onto the chair and pulled off her sunglasses with this dismissive flick of her wrist. I stared at her, confused, waiting for her to explain why she was in my house unannounced. But instead of speaking, she walked straight to my sofa. The same sofa I had freshly cleaned, and sat down with an arrogance that made my blood boil. She crossed her legs, leaned back, and then she looked at me, not with confusion, not with apology, but with this cold, challenging, almost hostile expression, like she was silently daring me to question her presence. I asked her calmly, "Is everything okay? Why did you just walk in?" She shrugged, like my question wasn't worth acknowledging, and said, "Your son gave me a key. Why shouldn't I come in?" I felt something drop inside me. The idea that she would use my son as an excuse to invade my personal space made me realize she had crossed a boundary I could no longer ignore. I asked her why she came, and she said she needed to discuss something important. But before she even explained, she stood up, walked around, picked up things from my shelves, set them down carelessly, and even commented, "You really need to update your furniture. Everything looks outdated." Something snapped inside me. The disrespect was too much, but I didn't show it, not yet. I told her to sit and talk if she had something to say. She sat again, eyes still cold, and said something that made my heart freeze. She said, "Your son and I have been discussing something, and honestly, it's time you start accepting changes. You can't keep interfering in our lives. You need to step back." A lot. Her tone wasn't suggestive or gentle, it was commanding, like she was giving orders to someone beneath her. I asked her what exactly she meant, and she said, "We're planning to move to another city. And before we do, we need to establish some boundaries. I don't want you calling him all the time. I don't want you visiting unless we specifically invite you. And I don't want you involving yourself in our decisions anymore." I stared at her in disbelief. She was dictating how I could interact with my own son. She didn't come to talk. She came to deliver an ultimatum. And the worst part was the confidence with which she said it, as if she knew she held power because my son always took her side. My chest tightened with anger, but I still tried to stay composed. I asked her why she felt the need to control everything. She smirked and said, "Because someone has to. You overwhelm him. You make him feel obligated. You're clingy. That word pierced me like a knife. I raised this boy. I supported him through every challenge. I loved him deeply and unconditionally. And she, someone who had known him for just a few years, dared to call me clingy." I felt my hands tremble, but I refused to let her see my weakness. I asked her calmly if she understood that marriage didn't erase family ties. She rolled her eyes and said, "Family ties don't mean controlling his life." Her entitlement, her arrogance, her complete lack of respect, it all piled up inside me, creating this storm I could no longer contain. She had walked into my home without permission. She had treated my belongings like trash. She had spoken to me like I was a problem she needed to solve. And now she was trying to dictate the terms of my relationship with my son. I knew something had to change. But before I could even respond, she kept talking. She said she wanted my son to spend less time with us, that she didn't want him being influenced by our family, that she wanted him to focus on her and their life together. She even suggested that maybe I should distance myself for a while, to give them space. It was unbelievable, it was insulting, and it was the breaking point. I felt the words building up inside me, ready to burst, but something told me to hold them back for the moment, because if I exploded now, she would twist the story, she would cry to my son, she would make herself the victim, and he would believe her because he always did. So I stayed quiet. I let her talk. I let her dig herself deeper into whatever twisted world she lived in, and as she spoke, I studied her expression. Cold, proud, self-satisfied. She thought she had already won. She thought she had the power. She thought I would simply accept her commands because she delivered them with confidence. But she had no idea what was coming. And before I tell you what happened next, before I reveal the moment that finally pushed everything over the edge and changed our relationship forever, I want to ask you something. If you were in my position, watching your daughter-in-law walk into your home without permission, sit on your sofa like she owned it, and then try to dictate how much access you should have to your own child, what would you do? What would you say? And would you hold back like I did, or would you confront her right then and there? Pause for a moment and tell me honestly. Because this is exactly the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice that changed everything. I stood there after asking that question to myself, trying to calm the storm inside me, trying to stop my heart from thundering against my ribs. She had no idea how close I was to snapping, how much of my patience had already been drained by her endless arrogance, how tightly I was holding the last threads of my self-control. And yet, she kept talking, kept lecturing me as if I were some disruptive child in need of correction. Her hands rested on her knees, her posture relaxed and confident, completely oblivious to the emotional earthquake she had triggered in me. She thought she had won. She thought her words were final. She thought I would simply accept everything she demanded, because she said it with that cold, polished tone she always used when she wanted to overpower someone. But she didn't realize that something in me had shifted. Something had opened. Something had awakened. I watched her as she adjusted her hair and glanced at her nails like she was bored. Like this entire discussion was a formality she had already prepared for, like she was just waiting for me to nod and agree so she could walk out feeling victorious. And maybe that's what angered me most, that she didn't even consider the possibility that I might push back, that I might defend myself, that I might actually be done being silent. I took a deep breath and stepped closer to her. She glanced up at me with that same mocking expression and said, "Look, I don't know why you're taking this so personally. We're just trying to build our life. And honestly, sometimes you make things harder." The dismissiveness in her voice cracked something in me, not abruptly, but slowly, like fractures spreading through glass until it finally shatters. I asked her, "Do you even hear yourself? Do you understand what you're saying? You walked into my home without permission. You insulted me, you insulted my belongings, and now you think you can regulate how I interact with my own son." She shrugged. As if all of this was trivial, as if my pain, my dignity, my boundaries meant nothing. She said, "It's not a big deal. You're overreacting. Honestly, I'm surprised you're making it about respect when it's clearly about control. That's the problem here. You don't know how to let go." I felt my chest tighten, but this time not in fear or doubt. This time in certainty, because that's when I realized she wasn't just entitled. She was manipulative. She was deliberately trying to make me doubt myself. I stepped closer, and she leaned back slightly but didn't break her eye contact. She genuinely believed she had the upper hand. And maybe for a while she did. Because I had allowed her to think so. But not anymore. I told her, "If you think I am going to let you disrespect me in my own home, you are mistaken." She smirked, cocking her head to the side like she found my statement amusing. "Respect goes both ways," she said. "Maybe if you respected our space, we wouldn't have these issues." Our space. She kept saying, "Or space," as if my son belonged solely to her world, as if I had no place in it anymore. I was about to respond when she stood up abruptly and started walking toward the hallway again, picking up random things from my shelves, touching decorations I cherished, items I had for years, pieces of my life. She grabbed a framed photo of my son as a child, holding it carelessly, barely glancing at it before setting it back down without care. That was the moment something in me surged forward. I walked over and took the frame before she could drop it. She raised her eyebrow and said, "You're being dramatic." Dramatic, another dismissive word she loved to use to undermine anyone who challenged her. And I realized she didn't see me as a mother. She saw me as an obstacle. I took a deep breath and said, "If you needed to talk, you should have called first. You don't walk into someone's home like this." She rolled her eyes. "Again with the house rules. God. You act like you're running some kind of palace." The disrespect was bubbling out of her uncontrollably now. She didn't even try to hide it. And then she said something that twisted the knife even deeper. "Your son understands boundaries. Maybe you should learn some too. We're adults. We don't need you interfering all the time. I asked her calmly. Interfering how? By offering advice when asked. By caring. By being involved as a parent. She crossed her arms and said, exactly, you care too much. You're always around. You expect updates. You expect involvement. It's exhausting. And honestly, we've both felt smothered. Both. She kept saying, both, grouping my son into her narrative, making it sound like he agreed with every insult she threw at me. She wanted me to question him. She wanted me to feel hurt. She wanted me to believe I was the problem. And for a moment, I almost did. But then I remembered all the times my son came to me for advice, for comfort, for support. All the times he told me he missed home. All the times he spoke about struggles in their marriage, feeling overwhelmed by her expectations, feeling like she pressured him into things he didn't want. He had never once said I was smothering him. He had never once told me to step back. He had never once made me feel unwelcome. Those words came only from her. I straightened my posture and told her, you don't get to dictate how I speak to my son. You don't get to walk into my home and talk to me like this. I have tolerated your attitude for years, but this is the line. She laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a mocking laugh. She said, what are you going to do? Kick me out? And the sarcastic tone she used, the arrogant tilt of her chin, the way she actually dared me to take action, something inside me hardened. I didn't plan to react. I didn't plan to take control so forcefully, but she had pushed me to a point where staying silent was no longer an option. I stepped forward, looked her directly in the eyes, and said, yes, if that's what it takes. She froze for a moment, shocked. She wasn't expecting that. Not from me. She thought I would always be patient, always hold back, always swallow my pride for the sake of keeping peace. But not today, she scoffed and said, you're being ridiculous. I'm not going anywhere. I walked toward the door, opened it wide, and said, then you can explain to my son why you were asked to leave after breaking into my home and disrespecting me. She narrowed her eyes, suddenly less confident. She said, he gave me a key. I replied, he did not give you permission to walk in unannounced. But go ahead, call him. Let's see who he sides with when he hears all of this. Her jaw tightened. That confidence she carried like armor started to crack. She walked toward me slowly, her steps controlled, her expression tense. You're overreacting, she said again, but her voice wasn't as steady as before. This is unnecessary, I responded. What's unnecessary is the way you've treated me. What's unnecessary is the disrespect you've shown me. What's unnecessary is you thinking you can control everything and everyone around you. She sighed dramatically and said, fine, I'll leave. But believe me, he's going to hear about this. She grabbed her purse, stormed past me, and walked out. I watched her go, feeling both relieved and strangely nervous, because I knew what was coming next. The call. The confrontation with my son, the twisting of the story. The dramatic tears she would use to paint herself as the victim. I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing deeply, trying to steady myself. It didn't take long. 10 minutes later my phone rang, my son's name flashed across the screen, and my heart clenched. I answered, bracing myself. He said, Mom, what happened? She's upset. Upset. Of course she was upset. I told him calmly. She walked into the house without knocking. She talked to me with disrespect. She touched everything without asking. And then she tried to dictate how much access I should have to you. My son hesitated. I could hear the conflict in his breathing. He said, she told me you yelled at her. I closed my eyes, anger burning in my chest. I did not yell, I said. I set boundaries. Something she's not used to respecting. He sighed and said, Mom, it's complicated. And that hurt more than anything. Because it shouldn't have been complicated. Right was right. Wrong was wrong. And barging into someone's home, disrespecting them, and issuing demands was wrong. I told him, I am not competing with your wife. I am not trying to control you. But I will not let anyone, speak to me the way she did today. He stayed quiet. Too quiet. Then he said, maybe we should talk in person. He arrived later that evening. I could see stress written all over his face. When he came in, he hugged me, which eased my heart a little, but then he said, you and she need to find a way to get along. I responded, getting along requires respect, and she has none. He rubbed his forehead and said, she feels like you judge her. I almost laughed. Judge her? I've done nothing but try to welcome her. She judges me every time she walks into a room. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. He knew. We talked for nearly an hour. I told him everything she had said, how she called me clingy, how she told me to distance myself, how she tried to micromanage my communication with him. His expression changed with each detail. Shock, confusion, frustration. He said, "She shouldn't have said those things." And I replied, "She shouldn't have acted that way either." He went home that night quieter than usual, and I knew a storm was brewing between them. Days went by. Then a week. I didn't hear from either of them. And honestly, part of me needed the silence. Part of me wanted them to sort themselves out without dragging me into the middle again. But then it happened. The climax of everything. My son showed up at my door unexpectedly. He looked exhausted, defeated almost. I invited him in, and he sat down on the same sofa where she had sat with arrogance. He took a breath and said, "Mom, we had a huge argument. She accused me of choosing you over her." My heart sank. Because that wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want him to choose. I wanted respect. I wanted peace. But she didn't understand peace. She understood power. He continued, "I told her what she did was wrong. I told her she can't talk to you like that." And she exploded. I asked him what he meant. He said she screamed, cried, threw things, and accused him of betraying her. She told him that if he supported me, he was abandoning her. Then he said the words I never expected to hear. She left. She went to her mother's house? I sat there, speechless. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to celebrate her absence. That would be wrong. But I couldn't pretend I wasn't relieved. My son said he needed space from both of us to think. That hurt, but I understood. Days passed again. And then she came back, not to my house, but to my son. They talked, they argued. They brought up every unresolved issue in their marriage. And in the middle of all this chaos, my son realized something. He realized how controlling she had been all along. How she manipulated situations. How she isolated him. How she made every disagreement my fault. He finally saw everything I had been silently enduring. And then it happened. He told her he wanted counseling. She refused. He said they needed boundaries. She refused again. He said she needed to respect his family. That was the final straw for her. She gave him an ultimatum: either you choose me fully, or you keep your mother out of our lives entirely. He chose neither. He packed a bag and left. He moved into a rented apartment for a while, telling her he needed serious space to rethink the marriage. She was furious. She called me screaming, blaming me for destroying her life. I told her calmly, "I didn't destroy anything. You did this to yourself with your disrespect." She hung up. Weeks passed before things began to settle. My son continued therapy alone. She refused to participate. He told me he needed time before deciding whether to continue the marriage. I respected that. I didn't pressure him. I didn't celebrate. I just supported him quietly, the way a mother should. Eventually he and she separated, not because I wanted that, but because her behavior had finally shown him the truth. He apologized to me many times, saying he didn't realize how bad things had become, how much she disrespected me, how much he had ignored. I told him I forgave him. Because I did. He was my son, my boy, and I loved him more than any argument could change. And now, looking back at everything, every insult, every boundary she broke, every moment she tried to diminish me, I realize I didn't overreact at all. I was pushed. I was disrespected. I was treated like a nuisance in my own home. And if I hadn't stood up for myself that day, she would have continued walking all over me forever. So if you were on my side, if you understood even a fraction of what I experienced, then like this video. If you believe I was right to finally say enough is enough, then subscribe for more stories like this. And if you've ever dealt with someone who tried to control your life the way she tried to control mine, share your thoughts in the comments. I'll see you all in the next story.